Most people involved in the design of buildings will be aware of the term elevation and what it means, but just for the sake of completeness, to remove any ambiguity, just going to explain very quickly what an elevation is and then go on to show you how you can create them in Revit. So an elevation is basically a side-on view of your building, either external or internal. So in our floor plan here is our simple building. So for example, if we were to stand here where I've placed my cursor and we were to look at this side of the building, what we would see is an elevation of this side here. So I can already show you one I've created. So there is an elevation view, basically a side-on view of our building. As I said, elevations can be external or internal. Internally, they're often referred to as room elevations. They show us the layout of rooms where fixtures and fittings need to be placed, for example. So I've got some room elevations in this room here. So if I switch to one of those, you can see an internal room elevation with the doors in the background and the furniture in front. Now, one of the real strengths of Revit is the ability to generate many views from a single model. Elevations are a really good example of that. So once we've got our basic 3D model, we can very quickly generate as many elevations as we need all the way around the building and in every room on every floor. Now, you can think of Revit elevations as basically cameras pointing at the model. This means that the elevation is always live and is always synchronized with the floor plans. So if, for example, as we develop our scheme, we go and move the window positions or add some doors in, the corresponding elevations will always be a true representation of that design. So those windows and doors, for example, will move or be added accordingly. Just before we go ahead and create some elevations, I just want to explain a little bit more about the elevation markers themselves, these symbols here, and how they work. So each marker represents where an elevation is created from. So the location of the elevation camera, if you like. So let's take this one, for example. Now there's a couple of different things happening here. If we hover over very gently with our cursor, we can pick out the complete elevation marker, the circle. You can see that highlighting there. But if I'm very careful and I hover over the black triangle, you can see I can identify that separately. So this is the complete elevation head or marker. If I select it, you can see that there are actually 4 triangles at 90 degrees to each other. So basically each elevation marker or head can generate 4 separate elevations. So if you like, 4 cameras all pointing out from the center at 90 degrees from each other. It's up to you which elevation view you need generating. You can have one of them, 2, 3 or 4, and you simply put a tick against the elevation view that you want to be generated. So typically for external elevations, you'll just have a single elevation view being generated from a marker. So one here pointing at this side of the building. Then we need a separate elevation head here with one view turned on pointing this way. Now the reason for having 4 different possible views being generated from one marker is when you use them internally. So if we zoom in here, again we've got the elevation head in the middle, and this time we've got all 4 views turned on. And if you click on an individual view, you can actually see the width of the elevation that's being generated and the depth, how far the elevation view is set at where it's clipped. So just to quickly recap, each elevation consists of a head or a marker, and each head can generate 4 independent views all at 90 degrees to each other. Unfortunately, you can't adjust the position, you can't add more in. It's up to 4 views. You can simply choose whether to tick those to turn them on or off. So let's go ahead and create some elevations. For the purpose of this demonstration, I've deleted all the existing ones we saw before, both externally and internally, and we're going to recreate them from scratch. So to generate elevations, you go to View, and on the Create panel, you've got an option there for elevation. Now I'll just mention, if I hit that little drop down, there are 2 options there, elevation and framing elevation. It is just the elevation option you want there. The framing elevation has a very specific use, and it's to do with structural framing and creates an elevation on the line of a structural grid. For every other type of elevation, you just want that first one there. So 99.9% of the time, that's the option you want there, elevation. So go ahead and click elevation. Immediately you get one of the elevation markers, the heads there on the end of your cursor for you to move around. It's going to create a single elevation view from that head by default. We can add additional ones, so up to 4 from each head as we saw before. Notice how as I move around the project, if you look at the little triangular tip, notice how it's sort of magnetizing itself to the building. So Revit is trying to predict what we might be interested in creating an elevation of. So I'm going to start up here, click to place, and you can see while we're still in the elevation command, we can go round and place additional markers. So you probably want one in there, one at the end, and we'll do one on that side. Now we'll just start externally to start with, and then I will show you some internal room elevations. So I'm going to cancel out of the elevation command. So let's go ahead and select one of these elevation views. Remember, as you move over it with your cursor, you can either select the whole head itself. So very quick recap, if you select that, you can actually then determine how many views, up to 4, are generated from each head. We've only got this one on at the moment. If you select the triangular tip, now notice how Revit has automatically determined the width of the model, so it's suggesting that you might be interested in an elevation for the whole length of the building. Just watch out for the depth of the elevation, the clip here. Now if you double click on the filled tip, it acts like a hyperlink and it takes you to that elevation view. If I open the elevation group in the project browser, you can see there elevation 2A is the active view. Just going to go back to the plan for a second, highlight that tip again. Notice how the depth of the elevation is set too close to the camera, so it's not picking up these walls here. So in a true architectural elevation, we'd want to see certainly that face, this one here, and so forth. So we need to increase the clipping plane, the depth of the elevation, at least to that point. No point taking it any further than that, because we're not going to see any more of the model. Now if we go back to that elevation, double click on it, we get a true elevation across the full width of the building. Go back to our plan. Let's now do a room elevation, or some room elevations in our model. Let's take this room here. So it's exactly the same tool you use for internal room elevations as external. So view, elevation, again the elevation head clings to your cursor, you place it in the model where you want, click to place, Notice how it is picking up on the walls. Click to place it, cancel out of the elevation tool. We don't want to create any more elevation heads, but we do now want to go and select the one we've just created, and we want to turn on the additional views from that particular head. So now we have 4 different room elevations being created. Again, we can double click like a hyperlink and it will take us to that particular elevation, elevation 1B. Just going to go back to my plan. Just going to highlight that particular view. Notice how the width of the elevation has been set automatically by Revit. Just watch out for scenarios like this. Obviously where the view was taken from, that was the width of the room. So strictly speaking, in that elevation, part of it is going to be missing there. So you either want to widen it there manually, or you're going to move the whole head down here, or have a separate marker to generate an elevation at the widest point would probably be the best solution. So that cropping there also takes place vertically in section, so Revit will automatically crop those elevations internally to the height of the room. So if it finds a floor in the model or a ceiling or a roof, it will crop vertically the height of those elevations, so they are true room elevations. Once you've created your elevations, it's very easy to make adjustments to them. So as we've seen, you can zoom in and select each individual elevation view. You get a line where the elevation camera is placed, so the back of the elevation. You can move that off the marker if you need to. You can adjust the width of the elevation with the little filled in blue grips on each end of that blue line. So just hover over, click and left. So just hover over the blue grip, left click and hold and drag accordingly to adjust the width of the elevation. You can adjust the depth of the elevation with the 2 blue triangular grips there. Think of this as the far clipping plane. So your camera view will stop at that depth. So generally with elevations, you're going to set it just behind the line that you would actually be able to see in real life. So no matter how much further we pull it across to the right, we're not going to see any more in the elevation because it's masked by these walls. So it's more efficient to just keep that pulled back just to the depth you need. Also, you can imagine if you had, in this example, another building, an outbuilding here where my cursor is, if the elevation depth was set right back here, then it might be a little confusing because in the elevation you'd actually see the wall coming in from the left hand side of the elevation. So again, another reason why you probably want to just crop that back just to what you'd actually be able to see in real life. Again, we said if you need additional views, so good example here where you've got this sort of internal return on the outside of the building, you might want to turn those 3 views on to get elevations generated on that wall, and that wall. As we said before, the filled in triangles act like hyperlinks, taking you straight to the views that they generate. And again, in elevation you can make adjustments to the height of the elevation, so you can crop that down to just what you need to see, and below. And again, we saw that width adjustment in plan. You can also do it in the elevation view itself. If I just zoom in on one of the elevation heads, you may have noticed during this unit these little dashed lines. There's one in the center of the elevation head and there's one next to each of the filled arrows. Those are where Revit is going to place the view reference, and it's going to do this automatically when these views are placed onto sheets. So when we come to print out the drawings, we want people to be able to actually know where to find these particular elevations, and that's where these references are going to appear, and as I say, they're going to be filled in automatically by Revit. I'm just going to show you how that works now. Now, the references will only be filled in once you've got the plan with the head on a sheet and also the corresponding views that it generates. So let's do that now. So I've got two sheets in my project. So I go to the first one. This sheet is A103, and I'm going to put that plan onto that sheet, place it there, and you can see the references are still not present because the actual elevation that those bubbles create have not been placed onto a sheet, so there's nothing Revit can use to create a reference. So let's go ahead and add some of these elevation views to another sheet. So sheet A104, I'm going to place elevation 3, drag that on, one there, another one there. So I'll be covering placing views onto sheets in a later unit, but just simply drag and drop. Notice how Revit finds common heights and levels and it's lining them up automatically. It's named them there, it's picking up the name from the project browser. We can rename those, just right click and rename. But now that I've got those three views onto a sheet, if I go back to the other sheet with a plan on, notice how for that particular elevation head it's being able to fill in the details. So those elevations are on sheet A104 and it tells you which view number 1, 2 and 3. So someone reading this plan can easily identify where to find those particular views.
And that completes this unit. To get the most out of this training material, please take the complete course online at bimscape.com. Here you will find a complete learning management system that allows you to work through the course at your own pace. Comprehensive written tutorials provide additional information to that found in the training videos. Mark each unit as complete as you finish it and move on to the next. At any point you can return to any of the units you have previously completed to go over the material again. If you'd like to take this course online, please visit www.bimscape.com/Revit for details.